Hi, welcome to the channel. If you have come across a few of my videos and you're interested in the sort of content that I cover, please do subscribe and feel free to share and leave a comment. I try to get back to comments. I can't get back to all of them, but what I would invite people to do is join live streams. I do them periodically, and it's just an opportunity to engage with me, to ask questions, to raise any subject you like, really, anything under the sun, um, and we discuss it. Also, speak to other subscribers, so it's a good opportunity. I do try to get back to comments, but I can't promise that I can get back to all of them. Um, so with this video, it ties into a subject I feel very strongly about, which is criminal justice. Um, there are other kinds of rehabilitation, of course. There is rehabilitation if someone's had a serious accident. This is kind of the path to recovery. And I think the term is also used for addicts recovering, like a rehabilitation process. But specifically in this video, I'm talking about criminal rehabilitation and my thoughts on it. So let me just get straight into it. I'm not against it. My position is basically it definitely serves an important part of justice. But there is very strong caveats to that. Now, before I get into this, I want to look at what I consider to be the two main schools of thought regarding approaches to crime. There are others, there's nuances, and there's schools of thought within these schools of thought. But I think, broadly speaking, there's two main approaches. There's a conservative approach and there's a liberal left approach. Now, I'll just say right now, I fall into the conservative camp, not party conservative. I've been very critical of the Tories in numerous areas, including actually justice. I think they have been a failure in that, or at least they have been a disappointment. I don't think they've done anywhere near in what they could have done in 14 years when they're supposed to be the party of law and order. Um, but I definitely fall into the socially conservative bracket here. There's other areas I veer to the left. I mean, if you've seen my video recently on welfare, I'd be described as lefty on that issue. But with crime, I am absolutely conservative, and I've no issue calling myself that. It used to be that I would try and say, oh, well, actually, my position's a liberal one because, you know, traditional liberals would believe in the greatest security for the greatest number and this sort of thing. I tried to, but I think it's because I was a member of the Liberal Democrats at the time and I was trying to vindicate to myself that these two positions could be aligned. Ultimately, one reason I left the Liberal Democrats is I felt they were too soft on crime and it just did not align to something I felt very strongly about. Um, Not quite as bad as I mean, the last party I would trust on this issue, just for the record, is the Greens. I absolutely. I mean, the SNP probably second from bottom, but the Greens, I honestly think, given half a chance, they would do some pretty extreme things. Um, but that's not really important because they're not going to get into power anyway. So I think if we look at the two approaches, what conservatives tend to focus on is they say, well, the offender has hurt society, so they must pay a price. Whereas the other side, the liberal left, look at it as the offenders hurt society, because of poverty, because of X, Y, and Z. So we need to find ways to help them to change their life. Now, I think both positions are valid, but in terms of the priorities, I think the conservative way of thinking is crime, punishment, like let's say do it this way, crime, punishment, rehabilitation. I think for a left leaning person, it's crime rehabilitation. And they just ignore the punishment part because they think punishment is an unpleasant word. I have a big problem with that. Now, when you push someone on that, they will say, oh no, but I do accept that they should be punished. But the point here, it is not the first thing they think of. I think there is a knee jerk reaction from the liberal left that we need to rehabilitate them. We need to look into that first of all. I think it's important, but I do not think it should be the first priority or at least the first part of the process. I think it's important later on in the process. I think the first thing has to be holding that person to account because if they're not held to account, justice has not been done. Basically, if there's no punishment, there's no justice. I don't think you could say justice is being done if there's no punishment. If a criminal is not feeling some sort of pushback, accountability for what they have done, if that isn't there, or if it isn't there to the depth where it should be, then I don't think justice is being done. So soft justice may as well be no justice. If the sentence doesn't match the gravity of the crime, that may as well be no sentence. I think there's little difference, in my opinion. Um, so I do think there's fundamentally different approaches. Yet both camps will say that they believe in rehabilitation. I believe it in most cases. However, one thing that needs to be considered is there are some inmates so dangerous, whose crimes were so heinous, I don't think they should ever be rehabilitated. Maybe the most you can say is within the prison system, so they're not a threat to other inmates, and that's about it. But I think there are some people who are so dangerous or who have committed crimes so evil and so abhorrent, they should never be released. They should never be in society. I'm talking about prolific child killers. I'm talking about mass murdering terrorists, serial killers, basically the worst of the worst. Um, yeah, I don't think those sort of people should ever be released. Now, as it stands, there's only a very small number of people who are serving a whole life tariff, meaning they will never be freed from prison. I think it's less than a dozen in the entire judicial system across the British Isles, whether in England and Wales and Scotland. I think it is less than a dozen. I may be wrong about that, but it certainly is a very small number. A life sentence in the public mind doesn't mean a life sentence. What it actually means is if someone commits murder and there's different precise circumstances which are all factored in, but let's say a premeditated murder, the chances are they'll get a life sentence. But what that actually translates as, they'll be open for parole in 15 to 18 years. They may well get out in 21 years. And then the rest of their so-called life sentence is, being monitored. So I suppose technically they're being monitored by the state for life, but I think this is misleading because what the public want to see with a life sentence is life means life, i.e., they never get released. So I think it needs to be replaced by another term. I think it needs to be replaced by a term like long prison sentence or something like that because it is to the public mind, it's not honest. This is one of those things that, in my view, degrades public trust. And it doesn't matter what legal bureaucrats say. They could say, oh, but it technically is a whole life sentence because there'd be. No, they need to start listening to the public. There is an incredible arrogance with our legal establishment. And I think it's just one of the things that is the reason why there's such little public trust. I think the attitude of the sentencing councils, respectively, is another one. They talk about public consultation, but how much do they actually act on? I do think there is a serious, deep detachment between public opinion and the opinion of judges, the sentencing council, legal bureaucrats. I think they live in a bubble, and I think there's even an elitism there. Now, I don't mean elitism in a financial sense. I mean, I think they are detached from public opinion, despite what they say. And I say that because sentencing proves it. Sentencing that routinely falls short of what the public expect proves that. So this isn't just hot air. There is actually an empirical basis for it. Um, with rehabilitation, why is it important? Well, if someone has done their time and then they're due to be released and they have actually served their time, then it does make sense that they're in a position where they're fit to re-enter society. It doesn't make sense if they're released and they're just angry and they're just going to go out and reoffend. So rehabilitation is definitely important. I completely agree with that. Um, and it makes sense that when they are released, they have some sort of stability and they are given the options for that. They are given the resources for that. So, for instance, I favour having a situation where people's criminal record isn't constantly used to stop them getting a job. It doesn't make sense whereby they always have to declare that, and therefore they're not going to get a job. And if they're unemployed, that sort of unemployment could lead to reoffending. Certainly not unemployed people are I'm not saying that, but yes, there has to be a situation where they don't then look at crime to fall back on. So I favour, for instance, a programme whereby companies would be given an incentive by the government to take on former offenders to help them get back on track. There's a famous scene in the film The Shawshank Redemption, if you've seen that movie. Great movie. Anyway, there's an elderly inmate there. He served many, many years for murder. And when he finally comes to being released, spoiler here if you haven't seen the film, he basically takes hostages, and people are shocked by this because he's usually quite peaceful inside. But the reason he does it is because he's terrified of being going to the outside. In the film story, he's imprisoned in about the 1900s, and he's released in the 1950s, early 1950s. There's cars around, it's a wholly different world, and he's an old man at this point, and he basically finds it too much. He's become institutionalized at that point, and he takes his own life. It's kind of a sad story. But anyway, part of that is he's working in a shopping mall, helping pack bags, so he's sort of doing a job. Well, I favour like a process like that. There's another film I can cite with Kevin Bacon, The Woodsman, and that it's a controversial subject matter. Basically, he's a predator, child predator. Naturally, he doesn't want to tell people about his past. You get the impression he wants to change, but you're never quite sure is he fully there. He has to stay within so many meters of a school. But basically, he's sent to this kind of factory as part of his rehabilitation. No one there knows what his offence is, but he just keeps himself to himself. But there is a young woman who finds out and she tells the others, and then he becomes stigmatized. So if you have an offender and there is an opportunity for them to reform and they have shown genuine remorse, I think they should be given the opportunities to do so. And part of that would be giving them, you know, work stability. That just makes sense. If they constantly have to say, by the way, I had a criminal record, and they then therefore can never get a job, clearly that's going to be a cycle. So there has to be a program whereby companies are told, yes, these people have committed crimes, yes, they are offenders, but give those companies some sort of incentive. It could be financial, it could be otherwise, to take those people on. I think there should be something done in that area, or even maybe not regular work. Maybe it could be something specific. Um, some sort of waste management, perhaps something that's yeah, this could take council jobs. So it's not black and white, but there'd be areas where you'd look at what is it that they can do that would stop them going back to a life of crime. That makes sense. So that sort of rehabilitation absolutely has a place. But for me, you cannot have rehabilitation if there's no remorse. Now, I'm not talking about cases where an offender or an inmate, I should say, says they really are innocent and it's a miscarriage of justice, because it would be ridiculous expecting someone to apologize for something they haven't done. So I think where there are cases where key evidence was ignored, there are serious question marks, then the right process there is to reevaluate the case, go through another trial and really, really look at that. Because a miscarriage of justice, it's a terrible thing. I may be hardline on crime, I may be conservative on crime, but I am genuinely sympathetic to people who've been screwed over by the system and they really are innocent. That's a terrible thing. I have as much sympathy for them as I do with victims of crime. In fact, they are victims as well. That would be a nightmare, being arrested for something you haven't done and then serving years in prison for it. And then the state says, "Oh, we're sorry, and here's a bit of money," but then they charge you board and bed as well. It's a disgrace. So that should be greatly reduced. So I'm not talking about cases where there's question marks, serious question marks over guilt. I'm talking about cases where it's clear cut, they've been found guilty in a court of law, there's no major question marks over that. In those cases, they have to show that they're genuinely remorseful. Now, how is this done? I don't think it's simply a case of a few tears and saying, "Oh, I want to change my life." I think they have to bow their head in shame and really, really show that they feel bad about what they've done to their victim. If that is not there, then how can they be rehabilitated? I think this is especially true of young offenders because, for example, the Scottish Sentencing Council states that they focus on rehabilitation for young offenders because they're more likely to be rehabilitated. I question that because there's many examples of young offenders, i.e. teen offenders, who literally notch up dozens and dozens of offences, and they still escape custodial sentencing, and they don't take it seriously. They know that their age protects them. Now, in that sort of situation, clearly it isn't working. Clearly, the tap on the wrist approach is not working. So you do need to elevate it. You do need to say, well, this time you're going to prison for a long time. And people might say, oh, will they miss out on their youth? Tough. They have hurt other people, and the first consideration must be the victim. So that gets into a question about if someone has served their time and there's two factors, are they safe to be released into the public and do they show genuine remorse? Now, there has to be both of those things there because you may have a situation where, I mean, you'd think they go in tandem, not necessarily. Um, if they say that they're remorseful, but then, they show signs of violence, then it's hot air and they're just trying to get out of jail. If they show that they're peaceful, but they say something like, I want to change my life, but there's an absence of an apology there. There's an absence of, I know what I done was terrible and I wish I could beg mercy from the person that I hurt. It has to be that dramatic, really, because if it's just, a statement, any inmate can say they're sorry. There has to be a way to see if that is sincere. Now, I appreciate it's not easy to do, um, but you could have a situation, for example, of trying to get them to understand or expressively understand what it was like in the victim's shoes. They can never fully understand, but there could be a process in that, and this could be part of the rehabilitation within prison near the end of their sentence. For example, if they're a burglar, they could be shown like a dramatization whereby they are in the shoes of the householder or someone in the house and they hear a knock in the night and they hear someone coming in, like something really, with the technology that's around nowadays, I don't see any reason why this can't be done. Really, really make them feel what it is like. This isn't revenge. This is just getting them to have some level of empathy. And if they can show some level of empathy, then they may well be ready for rehabilitation. But if they lack any remorse, if they see that as like a chore and they don't want to do it, or they're just saying things like, I want to change just as a get out of jail early card, no. I also don't agree with early release if someone's well behaved. I mean, if you murder someone and let's say you get 18 years, why should you be out in 12 just because you obey the prison rules? I think that's wrong. Um, Far too much early release. That's something that infuriates the public. A sentence should mean what it says. It should be what it says on the tin, basically. Um, but this is the important caveat. If you have an inmate who really has shown that they want to change, if they've obeyed the prison rules, obviously there's certain circumstances. If they've defended themselves from cases of bullying inside, that's different. But I'm talking about if they've, kept their head down, if they've just tried to get on with it, serve their time, if they've shown remorse in the court of law, if they've done all of that and they say, look, I want to be on the outside, I want to live a clean life, and if I'm given an opportunity, I want to ask an apology, or I want to state an apology to my victim, then all of those things should be, it makes no sense not to give them the opportunity to do that. Um, but there is a question of some people should not be released. I mean, even if they're technically safe, say someone kills four people and then after 20 years they come up for a parole hearing. This is particularly the case with young killers. Well, the question is, do they deserve to be released? They may technically be safer, they may have calmed down in that time, but do they actually deserve to be then on the outside? Let's say they done that when they were 17, so they get out of prison when they're 37. That's still pretty young. They can have a whole life ahead. They can have children, they can get married, they can just go on and get on with life. Is that really justified when they've taken four lives? I'm not convinced that it is. Now, I don't think prison should be brutal. I don't think prison should be inhumane. But if someone has committed a crime as heinous as that, should they be released? Should they be rehabilitated even if they say they're sorry? I don't think they should. Because if they really are remorseful, they will accept that as the price. That is the price for what I have done. There was a case in Australia where a young offender broke into a woman's home and murdered her. and there was an outcry because he only got 7 years. And then it was reevaluated and he got 15 years, which many would say is still too soft, but at least it was more than what it was. Um, but anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. Rehabilitation, of course, is an important role in justice. I'm not against it. Why I'm against is the notion that there should be rehabilitation without punishment, because you cannot tell someone, please change your life, please change your ways, if they are not, first of all, knowing that they are being held to account for what they have done, particularly with young offenders. In fact, particularly at a young age. And I would throw this straight back at the Scottish Sentencing Council. They talk about people under 25 don't have fully developed brains. Well, if you're not giving them sufficient punishment, then how will they know, if they're supposedly incapable of their own actions, that what they, if they're not being given some sort of punishment for it, how will they know then that they need to change? If they're given a community sentence for violent assault, that's a tap on the wrist. So the sentence must match the crime. I am for rehabilitation, but there's those strong caveats. There must be genuine remorse. They must be proven to be safe to be released into society, and they must have served their full sentence. Those are the caveats.